You know, we tend to think of country names as being pretty much set in stone. They're just permanent fixtures on the world map, right? But what if they're not? It turns out nations change their names more often than you might think, for all sorts of reasons, from declaring a new identity to solving a tricky diplomatic problem.
I mean, think about it. France, Japan, Brazil, their names feel as ancient and solid as their most famous landmarks. They're just there, a part of the world that we totally take for granted.
But here's the thing. That list of names, it's really more like a living document than some stone tablet. The world map is constantly and kind of quietly being edited. So let's dive in and explore why that happens.
Okay, so first things first. A country's name is way more than just a label or a brand. It's actually a fundamental piece of its legal identity on the world stage.
Yeah, this isn't just some marketing decision. It's a formal, deliberate act, and it has huge consequences. This is the name that goes on every single passport, every international treaty, and it's the name announced from the podium of the United Nations. It is absolutely serious business.
So that brings us to the core question. What on earth motivates a country to go through all the trouble of changing its official name? Well, the reasons are as diverse as the countries themselves.
Generally, though, the reasons fall into 5 key categories. They range from these really profound shifts in national identity all the way to some very practical modern-day concerns. Let's break them down.
One of the most powerful drivers, for sure, is decolonization. For a nation that's newly independent, shedding a name that was given to it by a colonial power is a profound statement. It's about erasing a symbol of subjugation and reclaiming an identity that actually reflects the country's own history and its own people.
And in that same vein, you see major political shifts, like revolutions or brand new constitutions, often trigger a name change. It's a really symbolic way to signal a clean break from a past regime. It tells the world and its own citizens that a totally new era has begun. You know, sometimes the reason is a little more subtle, but it's just as important. Take Eswatini, for example. In 2018, King Mswati III officially changed the name from Swaziland. So why? Well, Eswatini means land of the Swazis in their own language. The change just aligned the country's international name with what its people have always called their home.
Name changes can even be an incredibly powerful tool for diplomacy. For decades, Greece objected to its neighbor being called the Republic of Macedonia. This long-standing, pretty bitter dispute was finally resolved when the country agreed to become the Republic of North Macedonia. That one change paved the way for it to join NATO. It's a perfect example of statecraft in action.
And then sometimes the reasons are just plain practical. Turkey requested that the world use its native spelling, Türkiye, to get better control of its international brand. And the Czech Republic has been promoting Czechia as its official short name, kind of like how we use France for the French Republic, just to make it easier and more consistent for everyone.
All right, so we've covered the why, but what about the how? Changing a country's name isn't as simple as just announcing it and calling it a day. There is a whole formal process involved. It typically unfolds in these 4 steps. First, it all starts at home with some kind of legal act. Then, the government formally notifies everyone, from other countries to big organizations like the UN. After that, it's this gradual process of adoption, as other governments and institutions start using the new name. And finally, you have the massive logistical task of updating everything from passports and currency to maps.
So let's clear up a few common misconceptions about this whole process, because what a name change doesn't do is just as important as what it does.
Okay, so a big myth is that the United Nations has to approve a new name. That is just not true. A country simply informs the UN of its decision. And hey, while we live in a digital age, don't expect Google Maps to update overnight. It takes time for that change to filter through all the world's databases, maps, and encyclopedias. And let's be crystal clear on this. Changing a name doesn't change the state itself. The borders stay exactly the same. All its treaty obligations are still in force. The country is recognized as the exact same legal entity as before, just with a new name on the door. It's a rebranding, not a total reinvention of the state.
So ultimately, what does all of this reveal? Well, a country's name change is this fascinating intersection of its own identity and its place in the wider world.
Here's the key takeaway. A name change is where domestic law, international diplomacy, and just plain old practical usage all meet. A country makes a legal decision at home, it notifies the world, and then it basically hopes that everyone from map makers to news anchors actually adopts it.
And that leaves us with one final thought. A name is a label, sure, and it's a legal identifier and a diplomatic tool. But what does it truly represent?
the history of its people, the ambition of its leaders, or maybe it's simply the story a country wants to tell the world about itself.